Hello everybody, welcome back to Cinema Savvy. It is myself George bringing a brand new review, and today I'm going to be reviewing Brawn, the Impossible Formula 1 story, of course the documentary now streaming on Disney Plus here in the UK, Hulu in America, which of course tells the story of the 2009 F1 season for Brawn GP. And I'm excited to talk about this. I've not been able to talk about F1 for a long time on the channel. Last time I was Drive to Survive, and getting into it straight away, it's nice to finally be reviewing a decent documentary about the sport. And I know there's been plenty of other great ones. On the intro, of course, I had the Senna one on there too. So I'm going to get into that very shortly. But before I do, I just want to kick off with the socials, of course, for people that may be new to the channel. We don't get to talk about sport often. I love talking about football F1, but with a film channel, the chances are limited. So when they do pop up, we do like to cover them. And ever since this was announced, I think Silverstone last year, maybe a year and a half ago, this was announced that it was in production. Keanu Reeves was, of course, involved from the get-go, and it will be telling the story of Brawn. And I was very excited from the moment that announcement came. I followed it, I say closely. I didn't need to watch the trailer for this. I, of course, remember watching this season. It was the third year I'd been watching Formula 1. I started watching in 2007. So if I give a little bit of my sort of preamble as well with regards to that, I can remember this season quite well. I can't sit there and say it's one of my favourite seasons as a fan. I remember loving 2010. I think 2010 is one of the best years ever from memory watching Formula 1. But that does not mean anything away from 2009. And actually, I'm going to be talking a little bit at the end, actually, with regards to documentaries about Formula 1. Certainly with the Amazon Premier League stuff, there's some things that F1 could really borrow. And this series is a great way in getting into that. And kind of segueing my thoughts into this, with this being a 4-part documentary series, all released today. I've watched it across the morning, across the afternoon. I've been very excited to do so. And where I begin is talking actually as an overall. Not only do I think this is a very good documentary, it's very fair, and it's really interesting talking documentaries. I've always said they're by far the trickiest things to review, to talk about. They're a representation of real events, of course, but not with actors, with the people involved. And there's a mighty fine line between getting something completely right, getting something completely wrong. And then you also got to look into the target audience, the demographic, who has this been made for? And I think that's something Formula 1 has maybe not struggled with. They absolutely nailed it recently with the early seasons of Drive to Survive. And then it lost what made the show not just authentic, but it lost what made the show great through horrible editing, not fake news, but taking clips from other Grand Prix, putting them in the wrong ones, faking rivalries with certain drivers. And I was somewhat nervous, and my nerves were eased by the fact that Keanu Reeves was involved. He's been massive on motorsport across his life. He's certainly with I don't know if it's MotoGP or the motorbike stuff, he's always spoken about. Of course, you can see some of his films as well, what he's like with that. And I think by having him on board from day one, there's a certain bit of gravitas. He's done documentaries in the past as well. People, film-wise, will know that, especially with the film versus digital stuff. So Keanu Reeves has a history with documentaries. And actually, looking at Formula 1, 2009, it's not the most obvious season to talk about. If you were going to do a historical review on an F1 season, obviously so many people are going to talk about James Hunt, Niki Lauda, but 2009 is really interesting, and that's where my interest sort of came with this too, that it's not the story of the season, it's the story of this racing team, Brawn GP, and maybe for someone like myself, who I don't want to consider myself an old F1 fan now, but certainly being younger in 2007, 9, etc., I wouldn't have known about the financial crisis, the politics that were happening in the background, at the foreground. Social media is not the way it is. So whilst watching the footage of the races in this is memorable, the incidents, the ending, a lot of the politics was almost like a fresh new take for me. There's been great videos online in the past about Brawn GP, of course. Being sold for the pound is the big thing with regards to that. But what this documentary does really well is educate the audience into the environment, what happened, people losing their jobs, how they were struggling, why they struggled the way they did. And I think if a documentary gets it wrong, if they paint this perfect image of Brawn, then this documentary wouldn't work, because the one thing we know about Formula 1 is not that it's corrupt. Bernie Ecclestone is heavily involved in this. But what this show has done is really go into the politics in Formula 1, because we all know it exists. You're not watching Formula 1 if you're not watching the politics as well. It has always been about politics, and almost an episode of the 4 is dedicated, especially with the double diffuser and what happened there. Of course, if you watch the documentary, you know the real life stuff, you'll know that. But I was nervous saying, oh, okay, Christian Horner, once again, putting himself all over a documentary in Formula 1. Makes sense with Red Bull being rivals for this. And I wondered, okay, at what point are they going to talk about Red Bull then developing the double diffuser? And to the documentary's credit, they spoke about it straight away. And that's what I was nervous about, is that they weren't scared to not paint dirty pictures, but it wasn't one team principal saying, look at me, I'm the golden goose. And then, that you've got Bernie Ecclestone in this. I thought, okay, Bernie's in this. Does that mean we're going to have this false narrative of him being a great guy? No. Then we get loads of the stuff of Max Mosley and him and the mind games and, as I said, the politics of the team principals. It's a really fun dive into that, especially getting some of the archive footage whilst talking to them today. You can still see that some of them are still bitter about certain moments and whatnot. And with regards to Ross Brawn as well, he's certainly no angel with this documentary. It does very much look at his success, but I'm glad this isn't just here's the Ross Brawn documentary. It is about the team, because I think if you were to then tail off into a certain individual for too long, obviously his name's on it, he's got to be at the forefront, but Ross Brawn is no angel, which we also know, on the week of this documentary releasing, essentially talking about how great his team is, how great his career is. It's also the same week we get in the Las Vegas Grand Prix, in which the F1 organisers have admitted that they didn't bother to check the weather for a desert in November in the middle of the night. So, he isn't the genius we all think he is. But in the context of this documentary, I needed to bring up the Vegas stuff. It's ridiculous. I like the fact it's premiering now. And I've maybe segued somewhat away from the documentary. And it's hard with documentaries. You can't really talk about a cast as such. I've mentioned Christian Horner's all over it, as he always is. Obviously, Jenson Button and Barichello are massive in this. Of course, they're at Brawn. You can't really do this series without their involvement, if I'm being really honest. But I like the fact that we got to dive into their relationship again. It's unfortunate that I'm going back to Drive to Survive, but when Drive to Survive had fake rivalries between drivers, what this series does is a really eloquent way of saying, here's the rivalry that can be created by any two people on the grid, whether they're teammates, whether they're not, diving into the psychosis of the title challenge, how a driver would much rather lose to any other team than his own teammate. I really liked that this documentary took the time to go into that, and I think Keanu being there with them, he's not a narrator of people's careers, he is taking part in the interviews with everybody involved, and that just adds something that he has his notes. He's bringing up individual moments to the pair of them. They're talking about some of the issues they might have had with one another. But when you get to that final episode, you get to the ending, and they are showing the fact that Barichello was celebrating with Button, that they were friends. I really like it did that, because they could have easily manipulated the audience who weren't aware of other issues into thinking this was a horrible rivalry across it. It really wasn't. But then that's also segueing into one of my biggest criticisms. Where's Sebastian Vettel? Yes, it's a Brawn GP documentary. Yes, Christian Horner's all over it. I think it would have really added something to have had the other title challenger from 2009. Webber pops up a couple of times, not a lot, and I understand that, it's very different. Obviously, Seb's retired from racing now. Maybe they tried to interview him. I just think it's a shame we didn't get to talk about Vettel. Obviously, he then go on to win the 4 World Championships in a row the years that came after, and kind of in line with my criticism, not including Vettel, I know, again, this is Brawn's story, but it didn't really plant the seeds of Red Bull are going to go on to dominate. I know it's not sequential, there's no extra series, but I feel as if the diffuser and whatnot, and for Red Bull to have such a core presence through Horner in this documentary, I think we could have done a couple of bits here and there with them about teeing up maybe what could have come down the line. Again, I appreciate that isn't the purpose of this documentary, but it would have maybe justified why Christian Horner was so involved. And kind of sticking with that as well, I mentioned some of the stuff I loved with the politics. There's something incredible. We've got Christian Horner, we've got the old Ferrari chairman. Of course, we have Voter and the attempted breakaway. We get Brundle getting brought in for this as well. So it's really interesting seeing the different names being brought onto the documentary throughout, serving their purpose as well. Again, they're not lying, they're not dressing everything up to look great on camera. It's not Drive to Survive. This is showing some of the, not even darker side of Formula One, but we all know what it's like. A team develops something new. Everyone says it's against the rules. The FIA say, yes, this is against the rules, get rid. No, it's not. Then they're going to go and make it themselves. And this documentary was able to deliver with some of that. But I loved that sort of 14 years later, we've still got a bit of Ferrari chairman. We've still got Christian Horner bitten, that he thinks it was an illegal car. I mean, the hypocrisy of the current Red Bull car to be talking about illegal cars in the past is insane. And I do hope the audience watching do take other things away from that too. But it is one of them where it made for a really fascinating documentary. And again, for myself that remembers watching the year, this really is a big recommendation for me. I've been looking forward to this series for a long time. There's not too many episodes. There's not too few episodes. 4, roughly about an hour each, was perfect. I don't think it needed any more than that. As I said, it had the right person involved, it had the right people after, and even without jumping to the ending, the black and white credits, again, they bring up the fact this was sold to Mercedes. Mercedes would go on to dominate, and a lot of these people are involved in the sport still. A lot of the interviews, of course, taking place at Brackley, which obviously is where Merck are based, so it really did deliver on what I was hoping from it. And I guess then that's where the question of curiosity goes is, what will new fans think? What about the people that have watched F1 in the last 5 years? We've seen how high the audience has gotten over the last couple of years. Yes, the TV figures have dropped massively. Yes, social media is down 70%, but the sports audience has still increased. Even with the decreases, it's still more than there was 5 years ago. So I'm really excited to see what people make of this. In my head, without sounding like someone that just moans about the Drive to Survive crowd, I really don't. I love the fact that there's been new audiences for F1. I just hope that these audiences are educating themselves on the sport. Maybe that's more myself and how I approach being fans of whatnot. But when I got into Formula One, again, I mentioned 2007, it wasn't just about watching the present. It was about going back, learning out the history of the sport, learning about rules, regulations, car designs, all this sorts of stuff. Because the only real way to me to experience something as enjoyable as that is finding out the history of it. And I really hope that if this is a documentary that people were not aware of the story, then this has educated them to a great point. They can go out, they can do some more research. I'm sure there'll be a couple of inaccuracies here and there, but as I said, if you're a fan of the sport, you might not learn something new if you were watching it in 2009, but it's really a great way to go back. And kind of ending this on the more emotional beats is the 4th episode, where we don't get a lot of Jenson Button's dad until the episode of the title race, and I really, really like how they handled his dad and his career, saving it for the emotional crux. We get Anthony Hamilton popping up as well. Didn't know that he had a relationship with Jenson's father back when they were both on karting together, so there was some really interesting dynamics there, of course, with the fathers of world champions and whatnot. So it's one of them where it delivered all fronts. It was emotional, it was thrilling, historically accurate. It's what I was looking forward to. All the nerves I had were gone inside the first half hour, and I do hope that people at home get the chance to watch it too. And using that to round out this review, I'm clearly recommending it, but I want to hear what you all think of it. And maybe I'd love to know what other Formula One documentaries. I mean, Apple's of course got the film with Brad Pitt coming out, hopefully next year, maybe the year after due to the strikes. Obviously, we're going to get Drive to Survive next year. I do hope there's more of a market for once the Ferrari comes out in December, starring Adam Driver. Not heard great things about it, but still will be watching it. And I'd love to know what other documentaries would people want to see. If you're new to the sport, what years would you like to know more of? Of course, I mentioned the Senna documentary. One of my favourite films of all time, Rush. Obviously, it's based off the real life events, but there's a lot you can find of the F1 media, and it is worth investing into and having a look at. I said, if you're a fan of the sport looking to build up more knowledge, do have a look. I can tell you it's so much more interesting looking back than it is looking at the present. So with that in mind, thank you all for watching. Take care. See you on the next one.